All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. We've got a great show for you today. So it looks like we've got a bunch of people in the live chat. Fun, fun. So today we're going to be talking about the history of young Earth creationism, a thing that we have battled on this channel many times. We've done countless debates on this channel over the course of the last 9 years or so, and then innumerable more on
that makes me
Twitter.
feel old.
So. Yeah, I am old. And if you can hear the voice.
Oh, Jackson, something's happening with your microphone. I don't know.
Yeah, you sound a little off.
He's inaudible.
You sound like you're underwater.
Weird.
Oh, you're back.
Now it's
Sound
now it's
okay
back.
now?
Yep.
Okay, weird. Okay, well, also joining me is Dapper Dinosaur, and we have Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's super weird. I don't know why my mic is doing that.
Yeah, actually, Mike, Michael or Mike, I'm not sure. Which one would you prefer?
I don't know. It's easier for you to say.
Mike's probably
Mike
easier.
bother
It's
me.
one nice syllable. Actually, your video on the history of young Earth creationism is I really like it, and
Thank you.
I've recommended it to people who would not normally watch your content, and they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know." And I'm like, "No, you should watch this video. Like whatever else you think, you should watch this video. It's pretty good. It was thorough and it went through a lot of the history, so I really appreciate that because I don't really talk about the history of young Earth creationism too much, except for the fact that they haven't had a new argument in the last 40 years."
You don't know the half of it. It's like they haven't had a new argument in really 100 years. If you think.
Well,
about
yeah.
I would say even some of their stuff goes back to Georges Cuvier in the 1820s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yeah,
we're gonna get
right.
into. Yeah, so I agree with Dapper. I really enjoyed the video that you did on talking about the poetic structure of Genesis, for instance, of the creation narrative, because a while back, this is a number of years ago, you did a debate, which I'm sure you've tried to forget, with Kent Hovind.
Oh,
and in said debate, you gave a great intro or opening statement, which you lay out all these different lines of evidence for, here's why we should interpret it this way, here's what this and this means, here's the actual Hebrew behind this, here's how they interpreted all that. And then Kent just comes along and says, well, I just read it, and this is what the book says. And that was great. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I tell people that debate was my penance, because I was once a young Earth creationist, so that was me doing my penance for having have promoted that view at one point way back on MySpace, so it tells you how long ago that was. But yeah, it's the whole point was is that when I do those debates is not to even argue that my view is correct. It's just to say that, look, they're compatible. You can hold to Genesis and evolution, and it's gonna be okay. Everyone calm down. And so I present a specific view, but I thought about doing the debate different ways, where I present a different view. Just didn't really feel like it over the years. But yeah, it's one of the things I did discover when I was researching for the video you guys mentioned, the origins of young Earth creationism, is that I knew this a little bit, but I didn't know how deep it was. There's a lot of even church fathers, very early on, first couple hundred years of Christianity, they were young Earth creationists. They didn't have any reason not to be, but they were interpreting Genesis 1 allegorically. You have Augustine and Clement of Alexandria saying things like, yeah, these days are not literal. We don't take them literal. And so that was mind-boggling when I first discovered that many, many years ago, that some church fathers did that. I didn't realize how pervasive it was. But yeah, you wouldn't expect that, because we were told by young Earth creationists that it's all, yes, everyone interpreted Genesis just as we do here over at the Creation Museum, until that evil Darwin came along the scene and ruined everything. And it's just nonsense, actually, when you actually start getting into the history.
Yeah, it really, in a lot of ways, that narrative is an inversion of the actual events. because like you actually had evolution before you have a lot of these modern versions. But I guess I'm gonna get ahead of myself. So in some ways, as we were, the roots of like modern young Earth creationism center kind of in the. Oops, am I frozen? No,
No,
I'm okay.
Continue.
Okay. Sort of start taking place in like I suppose you could say they have their origins in the mid 1800s. Whereas there are other ideas that are like philosophic that definitely contribute to young Earth creationism. Things, terms that get tossed around a lot, like essentialism, right? So that
Mhm.
tends to play a role. Could you, or would you mind explaining, like, for the audience, how essentialism like factors into the young Earth creationism?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm trying to remember exactly how this is defined. Because I know they're like distinct concepts. So like essentialism is it refers to like the belief that there are things that have inherent defining characteristics or essence. Is that what you're referring to
Yeah,
specifically?
yeah,
Sort
and
of
Yeah.
like
this
a
idea kind of
platonic
goes back.
idealism sort of idea.
Yeah, that sort of stuff.
Sorry, say that again.
I said it's
Dapper.
sort of like a platonic ideal idea, which I actually do find a lot in young Earth creationism. Like
Yeah.
they seem to think of biology as like going along with these platonic ideals where it's like, well, I know what a kind is because, and if you dig down hard enough, it's like, well, because there is an ideal animal kind in my brain called cat, and this animal looks enough like the ideal that I hold in my brain that I'm going to call it that kind. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? What if I go look at Proilurus or Meiosis, and I'm like, I don't care. I have this idea of cat in my head, and that's what it is. That's a kind.
Yeah, I like the way you put it there. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's very Platonic esque in terms of how they see things, and they think like these kinds, because Genesis talks about kinds bringing forth after its kind. So therefore, it can only like produce within that kind. And this is an argument I actually saw Aaron Ra making one time that I thought was pretty good. He's like, well, actually, they're all the same kind. They're all eukaryotes, or they're all vertebrates, or
Yeah,
they're all tetrapods. You could make that same argument. They are all the same kind. The further back you go, and that they don't think like that. What they're thinking of is they're all the same kind as they are now. And so they all have to fit into those exact same kinds. And so one of the things I've said to them is like, listen, if a dog ever produced a non-dog, that would debunk evolution.
hmm
Because like that a dog will always produce a dog on the theory of evolution because you still bring forth after kinds. It's just that as the branching of dogs goes out, they'll create new different varieties, but they still always inherit everything their ancestors are. So, a dog is always going to be a canine and always going to be a mammal, always going to be a vertebrate, so forth and so forth. So you
there
can
was
kind of like use that against them a little bit.
there was never a time I spent like 5+ hours on the phone with Cindy Lincoln, an ex Mrs. Hovind, trying to explain that, and in the end realizing that at no point had I succeeded. And that sure was an experience. Love you, Cindy, if you're watching.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate Cindy for for her bravery in coming out against Hovind, but I mean, like, I've tried to like get across to Christians as like, guys, you don't need to hold to this. I mean, even if you, and that was one of the origins for that video, the origins of young Earth creationism was just trying to show them like, if you start go back in the history, this is not this is not a necessary historical view. There's many
Yeah,
views in nature you could totally
it's
take, and please calm down, everyone.
it reminds me of when you get lists of like famous creationist scientists from like AIG, and there are names from like 1540 something. And it's like, well, yeah, I get that this guy probably didn't accept the theory of evolution
Guys, Isaac
hundreds
Newton
of
was a
years before
creationist.
the theory of evolution. It's like that's not
Yeah.
really helpful. You need to find people who had a choice where it was like a question, which one do I go with? And then they
Mm-hmm.
opted for the creation, like the special creation, because obviously I have no beef with general creation. If you want to believe that God created the whole universe and he used various means that we've uncovered with science to do it, great. Have fun. That's absolutely fine by me. I encourage you, go check out, I don't know, Biologos or something.
Oh yeah, we love theistic evolution on this channel. Yeah,
Yeah.
all for
I
it.
mean, you brought up Isaac Newton. That's a good point. They always bring up him. He was a young Earth creationist. Well, yeah, he didn't. I mean, like geology hadn't really developed. Paleontology hadn't developed. He was working with the best data he had at the time.
Yeah.
And as that data developed, we saw the majority of European thinkers, natural philosophers, go like, oh, okay, yeah, it is an old Earth. And this is something Nicholas Rupke notes, is that actually a lot of like Christian thinkers that were scientists were excited about the new geology because they were refuting that old Aristotelian idea of an eternal Earth. And they were like, well, we can actually point to a beginning point now. So it actually rapidly went in that direction at first. And then, of course, the young Earth creationists started pushing back in the 1900s.
Yeah, the new geology. That is another topic that we'll circle back to a bit later because it's a famous book by George McCready Price.
One of the origins of many, many creationist talking points that persists to this day.
Yeah. So you one of the topics you mentioned was the concept of Barrowmans. That I believe that was one of the things that was that one of the things you discussed with Ken Hovind?
Speaking of, do we know who coined that term? Because that person needs to be slapped with a Hebrew grammar really hard.
Right. It's a weird word. Are you familiar with like the origins of that word or the history behind that idea? Yeah.
It's something. It's based on something in the biblical creation. It's probably going to go back to the word bara,
It does.
which is often translated as create. That kind of thing, and it shows up in Genesis. So that's probably going to be. I've not looked at actually how.
I know what the composite
about though.
Morphemes are. There's bara is from barat, which is he created, right? It's not just like to create or created is like a passive participle. It's literally the inflected form. Well, I mean, it's the lexical form because it's a Semitic language, so third person singular past tense masculine is generally the lexical form, but like it just means he created. It doesn't mean a created kind or anything. And then min is from mean with mem yod nun for kind or sort or type, which is just like in English with all those words. It's not a special technical term. It's literally one of the more ambiguous words you could possibly have because it's just a bunch of things that are similar enough that for the purposes of this discourse, you're going to group them together. It doesn't imply any kind of like objective hierarchies or like real types of things that you can find in nature that are unified by some objective criteria. It's literally just, I'm going to group some group of things together for the purposes of this discourse right now, just like with the English word. And for some reason, actually I know the reason, it's because creationists wanted to find a way to make all the animals fit on the ark. And so they're like, see, when God says kind, he's actually talking about a very technical group of created organisms that are actually related by common ancestry, apart from other organisms that are also related to each other. And so if we turn it into a technical kind thing, then we can say that all that Moses had to bring was representatives of the kinds, these larger groupings, and presto, we can cut the number of animals on the ark by like an order of magnitude or more.
Yeah. I mean, we only have to put like, 10,000 or so animals, and then all the millions of them just kind of, hyper evolve later. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, of course, we then get things like, oh, you need proboscideans to speciate twice every 3 years. The average female cow takes 3 years to go from one baby to the next, right? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's assuming, of course, they get pregnant every 3 years too. I mean,
that's the optimal rate because basically they have a 2-year pregnancy and usually they're during at least some of that they're raising their previous calf.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You just have the older sibling, raise the next one and then the next one and then so on and so on.
Yeah, and each of which is a new species.
Yes, also, yeah correct.
Like your proto-elephant is like, oh, look, that was a mastodon. Oh, look, I just gave birth to the proto-elephant that's later going to go turn into mammoths and African elephants and Asian elephants, and there's 2 species of African elephants, but then there's a whole bunch of other extinct species within all that. Yeah, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. We can totally get all of these.
I mean, they kind of believe in evolution if they think that's happening. It's like, and it's macro in a lot of ways. It's not micro, like when they're doing that kind of stuff. Because I mean, eventually you can go back far enough, like rabbits and pikas are going to be related. I mean, and so then they'll say, well, like Ken Hovind will say things like, well, as long as they can bring forth, they're of the same kind. But I mean, we have like certain types of rabbits that can't bring forth. We have certain types of dogs that can't bring forth. Are they now different kinds? Well, according to Hovind, they would have to be.
Someone needs to ask that man about the hamster. Do you know what the hamster?
Oh no!
You might not want to, so brace yourself. A hamster, I don't think that there's any more being produced right now because I think we've moved on with our technology. But a hamster is a thing that used to be fairly routinely produced, which is a hamster-human hybrid.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so what was happening was basically, sometimes people have fertility problems, and if you think that the problem might be that the man's sperm is not able to actually penetrate an ovum, then you do a test. But human ova are they're not easy to get a hold of, right? Because it requires lots of drugs and an invasive harvesting procedure and all this. And so what used to be done was they would just harvest eggs from hamsters, remove the zona pellucida, which does a little protein-like gate check, and then just release a sample of the man in question's sperm, and provided that his sperm were in fact capable of fertilizing an ovum at all, it would produce a hamster, which would then go on after fertilization to divide several times before self-terminating. And so the question is, well, unless you have a really clear line as to what counts as bringing forth and what doesn't, that you can use to exclude this, which they tend not to, that puts humans in the same kind as rodents, as all the rest of the primates, as well as the lagomorphs, like the rabbits and the hares and the pikas and whatnot.
Aren't you so glad you came on for this discussion?
Yeah,
aren't
you
you learning all
about
sorts of fun
hamsters.
stuff?
That's something. That's wow. Okay.
Yeah, so
Never
whenever
heard.
a creationist says, "Oh, if they can bring forth," I'm like, "Okay, well, guess what? You just united into the same kind." I guess maybe Noah, the ancestor of all of the future of that kind, he must have been some weird like shrew like proto primate. Is that what's going on?
Well, that'd be something. I mean,
God says,
Wow,
"Build
this-
an ark," and Noah just says, "Squeak."
this took an odd turn, but yeah, that'd be interesting. How far back that Noah's Ark story would have to go would be quite intense. But yeah,
I mean, I've heard Donnie Badinsky say that Noah was probably a Homo erectus.
yeah, I've heard people that like. I don't think William Lane Craig says that, but he does say like Adam was, and I think maybe he might put Noah in there as well. I don't know. I'm not too familiar with his view. But yeah, they try to like really fit everything in there. I think that's a little excessive, but I mean, that's a whole nother topic.
I mean, I would say that, yeah, it's definitely very excessive to say that the origin of Homo erectus was 6,000 years ago in Adam. I'm like, that's...
Well, no, they won't. William Lane Craig won't say that. He just puts Adam like,
Oh,
hundreds
yeah,
of
that's
thousands
true.
of years back.
I forgot, yeah.
And there's all
he's
these
an old Earth
gaps,
guy.
Oh,
All
yeah,
right.
he's a big old
My
Earth guy,
apologies, William Lane Craig, for that one. I misremembered your position.
No, but if you want to know about George McReady Price, he actually argues, as Ronald Numbers points out in this book, that after the Tower of Babel, there was a degradation which brought about like these other primates like Neanderthals and maybe even people of African descent, because he was a little racist. Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those other ironies where it's always like creationists love to go on with the whole like, we're the actual non-racist ones, you guys.
Yeah,
it's like,
If you just forget all the racism stuff, then that's true.
Yeah, and they'll say Darwin was a racist, but Darwin was actually pretty anti-racist. He was raised by abolitionist parents. I mean, there's a book called Darwin's Sacred Cause, and he devoured abolitionist tracts, and they argue that this even helped create his theory of evolution of a common ancestor because he was so into abolition.
I mean, if he were to be transported to 2025, I think some of his views would be definitely seen as pretty racist. But yeah, for the late 1800s, he was about as progressive as a white guy came.
He even participated in a slave revolt in Uruguay. Something that people who are racist tend not to do. They tend not to participate in slave revolts.
They're not. Yeah. John Brown did nothing wrong, by the way.
Correct. You know what? We were just talking about that off screen. So yeah. Speaking of the mid 1800s, so there was an event, or there was a group that formed in around like the 1840s that was kind of the intellectual progeny of which would give rise to creationism. Would you mind saying a bit on that, what that group was?
Oh, yes. Once upon a time, there was a group called the Millerites that knew Jesus was coming back. And they waited on a hill, And then the sun set, and they had the great disappointment. But no worries. They rounded up, and they had a visions that Jesus did kind of come back in a spiritual sense and do some stuff in the sky. And then they started the Seventh-day Adventist movement with their prophetess Ellen G. White. And she claimed she had visions that God took her back and showed her the creation happened in exactly 6 days, and the flood laid down all the rock layers and everything. And yeah, they were at that point, I mean, in like the late 1800s, they were like the majority of the young earth creationists as far as we can tell. And it's kind of shocking. I even have a hard time like digesting that, because it just seems so counterintuitive based on what we would assume the history would be. But in the late 1800s, I mean, you read people like Michael Roberts, Ronald Numbers, Nicholas Rupke. They're very clear. Like, in terms of writings we have left, most of these people were at least old earth creationists. Evolution was being taught in the Bible Belt and in the South in conservative Christian colleges. But the Seventh-day Adventists were adamantly young earth creationists because their prophetess, Ellen G. White, claimed to get visions. And so they were the ones that were really pushing it at that point the most, as far as we can tell. There were some Lutherans, for example, because, you know, Martin Luther said some stuff about the earth being young. So there were some Lutherans as well. Ronald Numbers talks about them in his book, The Creationists, but the majority, in terms of young earth creationists, were the small sect of the Seventh-day Adventists. And that's sort of, as you said, that's sort of the beginning that gives rise to the modern young earth creationist movement that takes hold in the 1960s.
Do you happen to know about it? Were like Southern Presbyterians also part of that movement very much?
Some were. So you had this thing where you had the Seventh-day Adventists that were big on it. And then you had some Lutherans sprinkled in, some Presbyterians, a couple Methodists over here, maybe a Catholic or two shows up occasionally, but then, you know, the rest of the Protestants are like, you get out of here, heretic. You know, that was kind of like the mentality. So you had a lot of that going on. And so you'd have various people sort of sprinkling in, flirting with it, kind of not. But you also had a lot of other views. Like you had the gap theory for Genesis. So there's this big gap in between Genesis 1 and 2. You had things like the day-age theory. You had progressive creationists. So you had people sprinkled in. You can't just say it was strictly Seventh-day Adventist and Lutheran. It was definitely a wide variety of different people. But, you know, they realized they were kind of like in the 1920s and the 1910s, they were pushing against the tide. And, you know, it's kind of funny. Like George McReady Price, who we can talk about, would send people off to colleges. Like he would like influence them. They go off to college to become a geologist, and they come back and they go like, actually, I'm not so sure about this anymore. I don't know. Like Howard Clark, for example, Price had to turn on him because he like started rejecting a lot of his ideas. But yeah, it's kind of what happened a lot.
That's crazy. I wonder, that's so wild that like people go work in like academia and then they come back as like not young earth creationists. It's so weird how that happens.
Yeah, I don't have any examples that I can think of that.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get a story out of here. There's actually a funny story with Price.
That book is titled The Creationists, right?
The Creationists by Ronald Numbers.
Yes. If anyone hasn't read it, absolutely should get that book.
Yeah. So George McReady Price was like the Seventh-day Adventist like spokesperson for the young earth. Kent Hovind gets a lot of his arguments from Price. He was the first guy to say the rocks state the fossils and the fossils state the rocks. Okay, that's where Kent Hovind got that argument. This idea that he took a verse, I think in 2 Peter, about in the last days will come scoffers. Price was the guy who said that's about modern evolutionists. Kent Hovind recycles that. And so Price was an armchair geologist, but so Ronald Numbers says in this on page 106, Price, an armchair scientist, understandably felt insecure about his lack of formal scientific training and his limited familiarity with the evidence he was disputing. Though he never claimed to be an expert field geologist or a scientific collector, he nevertheless made most of the little direct knowledge he did possess. He liked, for example, to claim that his experience selling books in eastern Canada and in the southern Colorado, where he had spent one summer while in college, gave him invaluable first-hand knowledge of the field of geology. That's right, selling textbooks. On more than one occasion, he actually visited Alberta to view famous overthrust near Banff and found that it looked perfectly natural and showed no physical signs of abnormal conditions. In 1926, while he was on... What's that?
What does that mean? What does it mean for overthrust to show abnormal, non-natural conditions? Like, what would the opposite be?
That's a good question. I was wondering that myself, but
It's like, this rock sure does look like a rock.
it looks
Yup,
completely
Price.
normal. Evolution debunked, yes. In 1926, while he was on appointment to England, the Adventist Church paid for him to spend a summer in the Swiss Alps investigating examples of upside-down strata. Naturally, you do wish to be caught in any statements that you cannot hold to in making declarations regarding special geological formations, he wrote, the empathetic president of the church. Still, Price's familiarity with the outdoor world remained rudimentary at best. In 1937, shortly before his retirement, some of his own students at Walla Walla College invited him to accompany them on a fossil hunting trip to the John Day country in Oregon. To their amazement, they discovered that the famed creationists could scarcely tell one fossil from another. So he didn't know anything. They would take him. They were like, "Oh, this is like our teacher. He got us into geology. We're going to take him out." And then he's out there and he can't figure anything out. But this was Price. He would send people to school. They start studying paleontology or geology, and then they realize, holy crap, this guy doesn't know anything. And we were getting our cues from him. And so this is what happened. He would get acolytes that were ignorant, not well trained, and then they would go into the field and they go, okay, Price doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's sort of distance ourselves from him.
So Dapper here, actually, I don't know if you still use it. There's a sound bite that he took from a debate he had with Kent Hovind.
It's at the beginning of every single one of my videos to this day.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So this soundbite has Dapper asking Kent Hovind, who, as we all know, loves to go by Dr. Dino, even though he doesn't have a doctorate at all in any field. And Dapper says to him, if you were given a fossil, how could you tell if it was a dinosaur? And Kent Hovind says, well, I don't know.
Not only that he doesn't know, that he's never thought of it, and he would have to go look that up. That the man who for decades was calling himself an expert on dinosaurs and the Bible, that is how he advertised himself. He had never thought at any point that, gee, maybe I should find out what makes something a dinosaur in the first place if I'm going to call myself an expert on dinosaurs. Of course, this is also the man who thinks that Timothy wrote First Timothy, so he's not an expert on the Bible either.
Yeah, you can't be claiming to be an expert if you don't know anything. I mean, like, I probably couldn't identify a fossil, but I don't claim to be an expert on that. I mean, like, trying to constantly quote other experts when you're doing this kind of stuff. Like, again, I wouldn't call myself an expert on creationist history. This is why in the video I did, I'm like, here's what Numbers said. Here's what Rupke said. Let's go to them,
Yeah. So what I have a question, because I haven't really looked into this and I don't know what it would be. But, like, what do you think it was that was the impetus for the spread of young Earth creationism as a popular position from Seventh-day Adventism, which I think everyone here would agree is held at arm's length by most other Christian groups who aren't Seventh-day Adventists, to put it mildly in many cases. But how did that idea from that fairly far afield sect that is generally not well regarded become what is now seemingly the mainstream view in at least evangelical Protestant Christianity?
Yeah, it's a complicated history. So in the 1950s, there was a guy named Bram, I think was his name. Something like that. He wrote a book arguing that, he over-exaggerated the influence of Price. And he said that Christians should really be taking they should really be taking progressive creationist views or other things like that. Well, it upset theologian in training, John Wickcom Jr. So he decided he was going to write his dissertation. Yeah, he was going to write his dissertation refuting Bram. So he wrote a dissertation defending Price's views and interpretation of Genesis and arguing for a young Earth. And he then, after, wanted to get his book published, but Numbers says that he had no scientific training. So he contacted like 5 geologists to try to get somebody to agree to write it with him.
Oops.
And so let me see. He says, so Wickcom sought out, this is on page 215, says, Wickcom sought out a number of known creationists, including Dudley Joseph Whitney, William J. Tinkle, Morris Price, and the Lutheran biologist John W. Klotz. So Price was too old. He said no. Whitney at first tried to beg off from reading the manuscript on the grounds that such routine procreationism stuff, that's a quote, routine procreationism stuff, wasted his time, and he could not imagine anything of value coming from Moody Press. Later, he reluctantly agreed to take a look at it, but was dismayed to find that Wickcom had an entire universe being created recently. Quote, why should the saints be so prone to take positions which discredit the Bible? End quote.
Mm.
To add to Wickcom's frustration, Tinkle kept pushing him to allow for a geological catastrophe before Adam. So he wrote to all these guys, and no one replied except for Morris, who wasn't a geologist. His doctorate was in like hydroelectric engineering or something, but he agreed to write this book arguing
Actually, I happen to know it was in hydrology, and he was actually pretty well respected in that field. And he wrote a book that became the standard textbook for hydrology engineering students for decades. So within that narrow scope, Morris was a pretty decent academic in terms of that. But then, he branched out into all of the paleontology and geology stuff.
Mhm.
It's like,
Yeah.
oof, not great.
So actually, John Wickcom Jr. was so nice. He actually gave Ronald Numbers their private correspondence when they were writing the book. So Numbers got to read all the letters between them.
Mhm.
And Numbers says like it's kind of hilarious. They would scold each other. Stop. Like Morris would say to Whitcomb Jr., "You're relying too much on Price. People are going to make fun of us. We got to distance ourselves from him." And then Whitcomb Jr. would respond with the same thing about him. And so Rice gets relegated from like the main body to like footnotes to like not even being mentioned. And so then they published their book, The Genesis Flood, and they had a crazy PR campaign. They just spread it everywhere. They really just reinvented the history, like this idea, like we've been the dominant view up until very recent when these evolutionists came on the scene and ruined everything. And so I think at the time, there was a lot of distrust in terms of leadership starting to form in like the American political system. You had things like shortly after, you had things like Watergate. You had the Vietnam War. People just, and it just started to, and you had also among Christians a lot of distrust in authority figures as well, because you had the sexual revolution. You had Hollywood pushing a lot of those ideas. So imagine yourself, you're a conservative Christian, you live in Alabama, and you feel like everyone's against you. Your government's lying to you. Hollywood and the news are pushing more secular atheist type ideas. And you're like, ugh, who do I trust? Well, here comes on the scene these young earth creationists saying like, it all went wrong when we got brought in evolution. And so they had an amazing PR campaign. They spread things around. The scientific community didn't have as good as a PR campaign as Numbers notes. And so they just got their information out everywhere they went. They're flying to Australia. They're flying to the Koreas, well, South Korea. They're flying everywhere to speak on this stuff. And then they're forming all sorts of new organizations like, Creation Resources International. So many different organizations just come up. And so it was almost like just like a complete like brain wipe from like maybe like late 60s to the early 90s, just like all this stuff is coming up. And then in the 80s, you get the satanic panic, which was all nonsense. And Christians were like, yes, Satan is pushing all these evil ideas like evolution, guys, and Dungeons and Dragons, which was actually made by a Christian. But anyway, so they started pushing this crazy stuff. And evolution just sort of got roped in there. And it's kind of, it just, here's the thing. It told a good story. People love a good story. Everything was wonderful and lovely. And then all of a sudden the evil evolutionists came and started destroying religion. And now look at all the bad that's happening in society. So now you have a defined good guy and a defined bad guy. So people latch onto that and they start going after that because that's the problem. And prima facie, it would look like it contradicts Genesis from your English translation. So people are going to dive into that. So that I think it was a mix of things. You had the great PR campaign of Whitcomb and Jr. and Morris. You had cultural changes and shifts happening. I had just talked about this like on a stream Monday. There was actually Stan, my co-host, did a whole bunch of really good research that a lot of churches in the 70s felt like they were under attack from the government that was trying to clamp down and fix segregation things, and they were going after a lot of churches.
Oh yeah,
they weren't even promoting it.
Falwell and Bob Jones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a whole mess. Yeah. And churches
think
got roped into that weren't even promoting segregation, but they felt like the government was attacking them regardless.
Yes, you're right. Because them and because Falwell, Bob Jones, and the guy who did the Heritage Foundation, Paul Wayrick. Yeah, you're right. They were all. I think you absolutely hit 100% the nail on the head with that response. That's been we're gonna go on a whole tangent here, and I'm allowing it. That has been my like conclusion. I've been doing so much reading on like conspiracy theories broadly, and everything you said is like 100% in line with what I've read about conspiracies, because from what I've looked at, and I'm not, not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, so this is my outsider opinion on it. And if someone is in the, in the live chat, they call me out, that's fine. But from what I've read, conspiracies like young Earth creationism, like flat Earth, like satanic panic stuff, or today immigration nonsense, like these all feed these are all fed by economic instability and insecurity is a lot of what it is, or cultural insecurity.
Cultural insecurity, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, and so these people, you're right, they feel like they're under attack. They have to put their blame somewhere. So the people who can swing in and be like, all right, here's where you put your blame. It's immigrants. It's, the evolutionists. You can go back, and you can go back to the founding of our country. You can look at like the Federalist Party blaming the Illuminati and saying like Jefferson is working with the French, right?
No,
and they're gonna
actually
do what?
That was true. Actually,
okay. My bad. But like Jefferson's gonna.
That's not true. Don't
have that. He's gonna be this big atheist president and wipe out religion, and and then like it just every cycle, it was like a cycle. It just every time it's okay. We're gonna blame a new group and another one, and that's because we have this repetitive, long-term instability, both like culturally, economically. There's just been a whole bunch of stuff happening because like since the the Industrial Revolution, I guess you could say before that, we've just like it's been faster and faster and faster in terms of like technological advancements and ways to like reach other people and spread ideas and do all this stuff. And so I don't know. Your thoughts, Dapper? What do you think about that?
I mean, it's certainly the case that has always been in American politics a reactionary segment of the political landscape that needs to have an adversary. And it's certainly, you can trace it. I don't think always directly. I do think there were areas in time or places in time where there wasn't always a direct throughput from one group to the other. But it really is, at least in the 20th century, a pretty direct line through from we want to stay segregated in not just our churches, which the government would have a hard time enforcing an anti-segregation in a church thing. And then, but not only that, also in our church schools, which that was being threatened by the government, right? And then once they realized that like, oh, the segregation thing is just not staying very popular, you can watch things like Bob Jones University and whatnot switch from talking a lot about segregation and things like that to switching to talking about things like abortion and evolution and gay people, basically, as their new enemies. And I do think that evolution, it serves as sort of a symbolic thing, I think, for some people who are sort of against the general establishment of academia, which is a thing that happens a lot, I think, especially in the kind of churches where they take pride in having a pastor who didn't go to seminary, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a strain in Christianity. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think you should want your faith leaders to be uneducated or
absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I've talked to a lot of pastors and priests and monks and nuns in my time, and I've always had better conversations with the ones who have, actually gone to some kind of university program to learn lots of things. But I think that especially in that group, it is sort of a stand-in for all of the evil forces of academia that are standing against their version of Christianity. And I think that one of the problems also is that is the kind of person who is most likely to also think that their version of Christianity is just synonymous with Christianity, which, spoiler alert, Mike, you might disagree with me about this, but there is no one actual version of Christianity. Christianity is too broad of a thing. There are too many people with different ideas, all under that umbrella, that you can't just say whatever I believe is in fact Christianity. You might think that you have the best version of Christianity, and I'm not really the person to come in and assess that. But what I can guarantee you is that you don't have the version of Christianity. You have
No,
a version.
I don't think I disagree with you based on the way you said it. And I always try to be charitable with how I'm interpreting things as best as I can be. But yeah, I mean, like, you can see like Catholics and Protestants, they were fighting a lot, more 100 years ago about this. And now there's a lot more ecumenicalism, some people refer to it as. But this idea that, like, okay, yeah, we're all Christians, but like we can't say like only like, the Second Baptist Church of Tennessee is the real only Christians. Like, there's just different ways to understand how to. And there's a book written, I think in the 1920s, called Streams in the Desert, which was kind of making a similar point. And his idea was like, you could think of Christianity like different streams going through the desert. There's a charismatic stream, there's a traditional stream, there's a very like quiet stream, and these are all flowing out from the one main stream.
Reminds me of Mere Christianity by Lewis.
Yeah, it's a good book. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, there's been a push though within the young Earth creationists that we need to get back to like true Christianity on that note, and that true Christianity is this idea you have to believe in as literal 6 days and the Earth is 6,000 years old, and these evolutionist views are getting in and ruining things. It's a similar idea with like the King James only. We need the pure Bible before these modern versions corrupted everything.
Okay. There's a lot of overlap between young Earth creationism and KJV onlyism. Not so much at the professional level, but like at the lay guy in the pew level.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. Do you?
I mean, there's many reasons. I mean, the lay guy in the pew is going to be getting a lot of his information from unreliable sources, like 24-hour news networks, social media, and they're gonna get a whole new different stream going on. I mean, there's always sort of been that divide, generally speaking, between like academia and like the lay people. And then you see like, shakeups happen every so often. This is common in, the history of Christendom, where eventually the lay people and the people up top get too divided. And then there's a big like chaotic kerfuffle, and things get sort of shook up, and there's new people from the lay that sort of rise up. Some of the more elites sort of fall down. I think that's just a natural result of culture, I think, is what I would probably have to say. Unfortunately, it's just that's the way humans can be hierarchical in a lot of ways. And when we formulate into big structural societies, I forget who I was reading, but it was I think it may have been someone with the last name of Bohm. When I was reading him when I was getting my master's, he was talking about the difference between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and he said Homo sapiens was the reason why we won is because we could form. Neanderthals had tribes, but they couldn't form long political chains of trade. And so we have like things being made in like Africa or like the Far East, and they're winding up with Homo sapiens during the hunter-gatherer periods in places like Turkey and like the Balkans. And it's like, whoa, so these Homo sapiens early on were trading so far. We were able to form these large political networks. And then we eventually, form city-states and, and slowly evolve in that sense. And so when we started forming that, there creates hierarchies from, you just sort of like build up from the tribal system. You got a tribal leader and everyone follows him. But then when you get much bigger systems, you get hierarchical structures. And then there's always going to be that divide between who's organizing the society versus who on the ground is like farming or fishing or, soldiers. It's interesting. I think it's just an interesting aspect that comes out of human cultures. It's just is what it is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think that there's probably a lot to that. It's just it's always been an odd combination to me, because so many of the prominent young Earth creationists who are in like the big organizations like Creation Ministries International, Institute for Creation Research, Answers in Genesis, like really none of those guys are KJV only, and they actually. I will criticize them in an opposite sense, in which I've seen them go like translation shopping to find the translation in English that works the best for their particular ideas. And it's like, hey, you've never cited this translation ever before. Why are you doing it this time? And I go check other translations, like, oh, I see why you're doing it this way. Okay.
Yeah. That happened to me one time. Someone found the Dewey Rhymes translation, if I'm pronouncing that rightly. This is before the King James was written. And I'm like, you went to the Dewey Rhymes.
Yeah.
I was like, you're really fishing.
Yep. Was this person Catholic?
No, I think they were actually. No, they were some young Earth creationists of some sort. I think
that's kind of weird, because the Dewey Rhymes is like a specifically Catholic translation.
Well, they're fishing. I mean.
Well, yeah. You'll any port in a storm when you're just wrong about the Bible, you just grab whatever you can.
I do want to say that was we I have a couple more or some other topics regarding the history stuff, but that is an odd thing. I think I've also seen that, but as you guys know, not really not a religion history person, so that is not something I tend to, on my side, that's not something I tend to think about, and so I do appreciate the pointing it out.
I noticed it because Kent Hovind is a KJV only guy,
Yeah,
and I don't know if you know this, Jackson, but I've covered a lot of Kent Hovind's material.
I think I did know that with Kentwood Bent, you know.
Yeah, with Bent Hovind, no relation. His
Yeah,
not a nephew.
yeah, and then a lot of the young Earth creationists online are just little like Kent Hovind clones, basically. So it's like, you know, Price to Hovind to, you know, a trillion little Hovindites online.
It's honestly weird to me how many of them pick some of the dumbest of the young Earth creationists to be like, to have as their like role model. Like, I find so many people who are just devoted fans of Kent Hovind or Carl Baugh, and it's like, okay, look, there's no, I would say there are no good young Earth creationist professionals out there, but you have picked some of the absolute bottom of the barrel examples. The people who even the other young Earth creationists are like, guys, this is really, really dumb. This is making us all look bad.
They're still around. I've not encountered a Hovinite.
I encountered
they're on they're on Twitter.
Facebook, for one thing.
I'll run into them on Twitter. I don't debate or argue with people. I don't squabble nearly as much on Twitter as I used to. I kind of put that aside because it's just with so many of them, it's just so utterly pointless. I mean, it's whack-a-mole. You know, it's as soon as you know, they say like, oh well, DNA proves. They'll cite that that study that was very bad, and it was like
the mitochondrial.
The
mitochondrial
clock was like
100,000 years or something is like the average time for like
they'll cite that,
yeah,
and then you can cite like, no, that's not true. Their study's bad for these reasons, and then it's okay. Well, why are there no transitional fossils? You know,
the thing is, even if that study were right about that, it doesn't help young Earth creationism at all.
Yeah, last time I checked, they don't think the Earth is 100,000 years old. So you know,
yeah. Well, and on top of that, it doesn't mean the study didn't say what they took it to say. The study didn't say all species originated around 100,000 years ago.
Correct. Right.
But that's what every single young Earth creationist interprets it to mean, because they don't know what mitochondrial Eve is in the first place. So a study about how long back, on average, you'd have to take, I think it was mammal species, to get to mitochondrial coalescence or their mitochondrial Eve, like, does not tell you when those species started. But I also have a request from chat.
Okay.
To explain the triangle meme about young Earth creationism. I don't know if you've heard this one, their IP. So the idea is, if you have a triangle, right, where you have at one vertex you have young Earth creationist, at another vertex you have well-informed, and at the third vertex you have honest. You are allowed at most two vertices of the triangle, one person. Sometimes you only get one, but you are allowed at most two. You cannot have all three.
What did you say the second vertex was?
So there's young Earth creationist, well-informed, and honest.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah, so you can be a dishonest creationist, or who's well-informed, or you can be a honest creationist who just doesn't know what he's talking about. Or since you can't have just one, you do get people like Raw Matt, who just chooses to be a young Earth creationist and chooses to be neither honest nor well-informed.
The breatharian himself.
Yeah. I forgot how he even existed until you mentioned him just now.
I'm sorry.
I have not thought about them at all in such a long time. They did a response to me on something like several years ago, and I watched it and I was like,
it's incomprehensible.
It was incomprehensible.
Matt is a bit of a meme on my channel for a certain few particular claims that he's made. Like, he's claimed that the Bible was at least partially written in a language he calls pre-Yiddish.
What? Hold up, pre-Yiddish?
Yeah, pre-Yiddish apparently is one of the languages the Bible was written in. He claims to be an ordained Essene, which is weird since there are no more Essenes, and they never ordained anyone.
No, he's not. Nope. I will not say that. No.
Yep. So he's made a number of these very bizarre claims. One of my favorites was when he said that Proboscis didn't have molars while showing a close-up of Proboscis' molars in the article in which he said it didn't have molars. That was fun.
He said on a video he responded to of mine that a gene got moved from the nucleus to the plasma membrane, because that's a thing that happens, I guess.
Which, no, it's not.
No.
Yeah, so I only remember he exists because he's basically like the incarnation of stupidity.
Oh, and
as well as dishonesty, because he's been known to take conversations he's had or videos he's produced and stealth edit them to make himself look slightly less idiotic without ever telling anyone that this happened.
Oh, Matt Powell did that to me also, which was fun.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Yiddish is about 1,000 years old or so, developed from a fusion of German, Hebrew, and Aramaic. So maybe he's right, because the Bible was written in Hebrew and Aramaic. So, I mean...
the thing is, though, that...
maybe?
Look, Yiddish is a Germanic language that has a lot of lexical entries from Aramaic and Hebrew. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason that, like, the Yiddish word for friend is, like, Freund, which is directly cognate to the English and the Germanic words for friend, right? And so anything that's going to be pre-Yiddish is just going to be older versions of German.
Yeah, it's mostly German, it seems. So, I mean,
it's like calling Latin pre-English. It's like, look, I took Old English. Trust me, Latin isn't pre-English. I can promise you that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, one of the things I am seeing now is I'm seeing a lot of people move into young Earth creationism because they're trying to. You're seeing like a rise of like traditionalism. Like people a lot of young men are like trying to like be based, and so they become like super Catholic or super Orthodox, and then they become young Earth creationists because they think that's part of it. And it's weird because even a lot of the leaders in those groups don't promote that. But I think this speaks to like just the general psychology of people. It's like you have a pendulum swing. You have people go to the right in one generation, and the next they go to the left, and then they go to the right, and then they go back. But when they go to the right, they think if they just go to the extreme in a lot of places, that's the place to be, because it's just opposite of everything they think they're fighting against. And so I think that probably did happen a lot in like the 80s, for example, with young Earth creationists. We're anti-Hollywood. We're so anti-Hollywood. We're so Christian. We're just going to go into this young Earth creationists because it's the most anti-Hollywood sounding thing we got. The most satanic thing, we could think of. It's kind of just, unfortunately, just human psychology it sees. I mean, like, again, it's fascinating to discuss. But I mean, like, I always find that stuff kind of fascinating, the way people just sort of move into these movements.
Yeah, I think in some ways, like today, it's funny because I think that creationism it's been on the downslope for a couple of decades in terms of adherence, right? But we see the rise, I'm not quite sure in its place, but alongside it, of a bunch of other conspiracy movements. And these movements also, some of them have, and this kind of goes back to our structural stuff we were talking about earlier, some of them are the result of public relations campaigns. Like, for instance, the like, smoking doesn't cause cancer. That was pushed in the 60s by the tobacco industry, and then that was followed up by, in the 80s, the no, secondhand smoking doesn't cause lung cancer. And in the 70s you had fossil fuel industries pushing against the existence of anthropogenic acid rain and the hole in the ozone, and then climate change later. And so these movements had billions of dollars behind them, and then you get a bunch of kind of hangers on with like young Earth creationism and anti-vax, because there are no companies or corporations pushing anti-vax. It's a thing that has come into existence as a result of, or has come into the wider consciousness as a result of the anti-intellectualism that already existed. These movements that were pushed. And I think young Earth creationism also today is kind of spread. I'd be curious to look at the numbers. All I've seen recently, like when I looked at it a few years ago, I just remember seeing like it's been going down. But I'd be curious, I guess, to look at it again and see like what, if the numbers have gone up or if they've stayed stable or what. I hope. What do you guys? I also hope they've gone down, but it's the other conspiracies have gotten so much louder, right? Like, and I think also part of that was in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 90s, public figures like politicians, for instance, they wouldn't acknowledge the existence of these groups, right? So they may in private agree with them, but they won't publicly say, like, we're gonna fight, the solar and wind power people, and climate change isn't real and all that sort of stuff. But we've moved away from those sorts of people, and now we do have a lot of very public politicians who are just outright saying this sort of stuff.
Yeah. It's a weird. People just get tribal. I mean, we're a tribal species. So if I'm going to move into a new tribe, you think you got to show you're a new you come to a new tribe. You got to really show how committed you are.
Sure.
Like we see this like with like people that like go like convert to like Islam or Christianity. They go, well, I'm gonna go uber support for this kind of stuff. I'm gonna really go, and they go and like all. So what they end up doing is end up taking a lot of views in their ideology that they think is just going to show how committed they are, and sometimes that's going to include young Earth creationism. And so, I think a lot of people have fallen to that, unfortunately, and they assume that if you get into one of these religious movements, you have to go uber all in. And so I've actually seen like Muslim and Christian converts become young Earth creationists because they really want to show how committed they are. Sure. Trust me, guys, I'm like one of you, even though I'm a newcomer into it. So we hear about the zeal of the convert, someone becomes a convert, and it happens in a lot of different movements, political ones as well. Sure. Like I've seen people like go from Republican to Democrat, vice versa. And they're like, I got to really show my zeal for my new movement. And that's young Earth creationism will get launched into that when you're, becoming like a new Christian, unfortunately. And what I try to do is say like, no, it's okay. Please don't don't do that. Don't do that for sure. And so luckily, I mean, I will say, I haven't got them recently, but I don't check my email as much as I used to. I have someone now do that for me because it was just too much pile up. But when I was routinely checking my email, I'd get at least one email a week from someone who said like, hey, I was raised young Earth creationist, or I was really consider that, and your videos prevented me. So that always gives me
some of my favorite emails or messages. Yeah. Those are, and also you reminded me that some of the most annoying people that I've ever met were people who were young men who were recent converts to either Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. And they are some of the most insufferable humans in the world. And so this is advice that I've heard other people give who aren't me. Hey, if you just converted to Eastern Orthodoxy or Catholicism, maybe give it like a decade before you start speaking with authority about like the traditions of the church and what the church fathers would say, and your deep understanding of the theology of this religion you've converted to. You give it a decade, because oh boy, do you get some pretty wild takes from recent converts to either of those.
And I'm sure you also we're all aware here of people who are like who become like fanatical atheists, and they are like mythicists, stuff like that. And it's like, come on, guys, please don't.
Mythicists, young Earth creationists for people who stopped being Christians, but who missed the crazy conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
I think have you heard of Tim O'Neill, who runs History for Atheists?
Yeah.
Yes, I've actually had him on my channel.
Oh, good.
I follow him. I haven't really interacted with him that much, but yeah.
Yeah, he said something about this once, like, that he sees like a lot of fundamentalist Christians deconvert, but they bring like the fundamentalism with them. And so they go in the extreme opposite. And what do? They become Jesus mythicists. And it's like he pushes back against Jesus mythicism. But yeah, it's fundamental.
The Council of Nicaea picked the 66 books of the Bible, and it's like, that is wrong at every single level.
No. Billy Carson said that's what happened. It must be true.
Did he actually say that?
Oh, he said a lot of things.
No.
I'm sure.
My
probably.
God. I hope not. I've got a series about Billy Carson going right now.
Well, if he's wrong about physics and everything else, might as well be wrong about religion too, I guess.
No, he said he's one of the world-leading experts in Sumerian ones. It still sits in my brain going, bro, have you even heard of an Assyriologist? Like, no, you're not.
I absolutely do not believe that Billy Carson can read a single word in Sumerian, which I have a single word in Sumerian that I can read. It's just one, but I can read it, gosh darn it. And so, like, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. But yeah, Tim was saying, like you'll get a lot of that. Like a lot of these ex-young Earth creationists will go into mysticism. It's unfortunate, to say the least, because it'd be nice if when people change views, they just sort of like change views. They don't have to like. But I think it comes out of psychology, and I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I just find it fascinating that we see new converts. It's like they got to prove themselves to the tribe, and so this is why they take
Sure.
on
Yeah.
radical extremist views to really show how committed they are. It's unfortunate, but I think that just is human psychology.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's this need to want to be accepted into the group, and if you are new to the group, it's an easy default to go with. Well, then I'm just going to go as hard into this as possible in order to increase, my like cred with the in group. And you can even see it in like like fandoms, right? Like someone will find some new show and then they'll discover there's a fandom around it, and then suddenly for the next like year or two, that whatever fandom it is becomes this person's entire personality. And it's like, oh, okay, that's an option, I suppose. And that's one of the reasons why I say, like, hey, if you're a recent Catholic or Orthodox convert, because I see it especially with these groups, just give it a decade. Just cool your heels, work on the whole like receiving sacraments and all that, and then maybe afterwards, when you've cooled off a little bit and you're just into the routine of the religion, maybe then start talking about what the religion's all about and what it says and why people are wrong about it. Because, whew, I mean, I have seen people say some pretty wild things, like, oh, yeah, the actual real Catholicism, that's actually going to be a young Earth creationist and Big Bang. Yeah, I know it was discovered by a Catholic, but I mean, come on. Or like you'll get like, I've also found like ethno-nationalist Eastern Orthodox people, and it's like, hey, the Eastern Orthodox had a whole council about whether or not it was allowable to have churches divided up by like ethnicity, and they said no, it wasn't okay. It's actually banned. So why are you pro-segregation at a societal level while being a member of a church that says you're not allowed to have segregated churches, period? And they said that hundreds of years ago. This was a thing that came up in Constantinople, and they were like, yeah, we don't like all these varying ethnic hierarchies that are not allowing people from other ethnicities to join those local parishes. Nope.
Yeah.
No more segregation.
Well, that's a good point you brought up. I mean, like people think like, again, they think the traditional like Catholic or the Orthodox view is young Earth creationist, and they never really had an official, as far as I can tell from reading Michael Roberts, they never really had an official view on the age of the Earth or anything. And they were yeah, I mean, they weren't literalists in a lot of ways. These medieval commentators, they took a lot of like spiritual readings, and this is something I remember Tim O'Neill pointed out for me a while ago, and I think I also read it somewhere else. But like, go back to Galileo. There's a lot of misconceptions about Galileo, but Cardinal Bellarmine in his injunction, the 1616 one, he was responding in the Foscarini letter. It's a famous letter. He was responding and he said, listen, if it turns out that like the Copernican model is right, it just means we have to reinterpret scripture carefully. They were very much of this idea, again, this theology, the two books, the book of nature and the book of scripture. If nature shows one thing, it means, that it helps us reinterpret scripture, and then scripture can give us guidance for studying nature. And there's continuous mutual thing going on. And so, this was very much in the days of Galileo even. They weren't like these hard, strict literalists that said the Bible says this, therefore Galileo is wrong. They were very much like, we'll reinterpret it if you turn out to be right. But Galileo actually didn't do a good job of arguing for his model when he published the...
no, he did not.
Yeah, the chief concerning the dialogue or something. But he one of his arguments is that the reason why there are tides is because the Earth is moving around the sun, and it's causing, if you take like a bowl of water and sloshes the water by doing that, you're going to get movement. And he like scolded like Kepler for like thinking the moon had any influence on the tides. Really, it had to be the rotation of the Earth as it moves around the sun. And it's completely wrong. I mean, when the church was like against him, they were actually right to say, this is a dumb argument, sir. Like it was a political mess.
It was because of, I think Dapper was actually the one who first told me about that. And then since then, every time I read a book that talks about like history of science and uses that example, I'm just like, oh no, come on, guys,
Yeah,
research, please.
even the Cosmos revival used that, as well as
Mm-hmm.
who was that one guy who was burned at the stake for denying the Trinity, but lots of people like to
Bruno.
Bruno, yeah,
Bruno.
Giordano Bruno, yeah. Like those two are some of the biggest ones. Like first, no one in the church really cared about the plurality of worlds idea by Giordano Bruno. He was executed for rejecting the Trinity. Now, I am not okay with executing people for rejecting the Trinity. I don't think that's
Agreed.
an appropriate thing to do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I also
sure.
don't think you should lie about the reason he was executed, because it wasn't anything to do with his plurality of worlds idea. Because frankly, lots of people have been having plurality of worlds ideas before him, and the church just didn't care. They were like, whatever, sure, why not? I don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of my favorite books is The War on Science by Sean Otto. I highly recommend it. It's very good, very well, very good in the way it narrativizes, like the way that Islam and Christianity contributed to science, and then gets into like the Enlightenment and all that, and goes on all the way up to today. But yeah, he does reference the Galileo affair, and I just wish that weren't in there. But otherwise, I think the book is terrific. Highly recommend it. Over the there's a new book that just came out recently called The War on Science that's like edited by Lawrence Krauss. I don't recommend that one. But
oh yeah, I've not read it. I debated Krauss a couple months ago, but not impressed. Unfortunately, I was hoping for more. But yeah, the whole Galileo affair is a whole mess. I'm trying to be very careful because Tim O'Neill is like, this is like his go-to thing. He's really studied this a lot, and like it's a whole political mess. But one of the things he shows in it is that they just weren't like these literalist people that had to like force a view. I mean, at the time of Galileo, the science of the time actually favored the Tychonian model. This idea that the Earth is the center, the sun goes around the Earth, but all the planets go around the sun. And based on the most up-to-date science of the time, that's what was favored. Now, as Kepler came out and was making his advances, and some of his different theories and ideas were getting demonstrated to be true, the scientific community shifted more towards that. But it wasn't established in Galileo's time at that point yet. And the Copernican model, people don't realize, has never actually been the model of our solar system, because Copernicus said like the planet's got to go around the sun in like a perfect circle. There's no physics that could explain how that's possible. Kepler and Newton contributed to this, like like an ecliptic, like what is the word?
Elliptical, yeah.
Elliptical. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Elliptical way they would move, and they were explaining that would be a physics.
Yeah, the ecliptic is the path across the celestial sphere that the sun traces throughout the year, and all the planets do stay close to the ecliptic, so it's connected. It's a word that's in there, but
And that's when they're starting to study a lot of other fields, and they're starting to realize, shortly after that, they realize the Earth actually has layers, and it shows aging, and as the scientific community was advancing, no one was like, no, young Earth creationism, we must hold on to it. By the 1850s, the only ones left were the spiritual geologists, and then they died out, and then you were just left with the Seventh-day Adventists for the most part.
So, do you think that eventually we will get to a point where a young Earth, in terms of Christian circles, will be as uncommon a belief as, say, a flat Earth, which isn't gone, but it's certainly not mainstream in any major Christian groups that I'm aware of?
That is my hope and dream. I think it will happen eventually. Just like we don't have people today thinking that like emotions are like in the guts, like they used to think. Like we get the idea of like I can feel it in my heart, or I love you with all my heart, kind of things. It comes from the ancient beliefs that they thought that's where emotions were, and the brain was just useless.
Actually, the Old Testament uses gut or intestines or stomach a lot.
Yeah, it does.
It's heart.
It's like Proverbs. There's a place in Proverbs that says, "My kidneys will rejoice when your mouth speaks what's right."
I love it when my kids rejoice. It's my favorite.
Yeah, something like that. So I think eventually
they definitely do that when you drink water.
Should go get some water.
Drinking water, yes. So yeah, I think we will get to that point as it just keeps advancing. It's just there's always these movements that come along and they want to like push back against the authorities, and they end up going into some pretty crazy and dumb ideas. And it's just it is what it is. So I think it's one of those. It's not going to be like a linear movement, but it will be like a jagged movement and eventually young Earth creationism will just be a thing of the past. I don't think
Mhm.
Christian. There's no reason that there's nothing in the Bible which says you have to be a young Earth creationist, like an essential doctrine. There's nothing that says, in Genesis, you have to interpret it this way, this kind of stuff. There's all sorts of different views. And people may say, well, it may not be like, trying to be fair to different people out there. They may say, well, this is the best way to read it. Well, that's always going to be up for debate. Because we're in a post-Aristotelian world. I mean, they were not thinking like we are in a lot of ways. So it's kind of hard to even get into their thoughts in a lot of ways and try to figure out what they were saying. And now with the rise of things in philosophy like speech act theory, it's going to become even easier to deal with these kind of issues. So there's all sorts of different issues here that are going to rise. But I do think in terms of the science, young Earth creationism is practically dead, and we're just waiting on the last ones. I think it was Max Planck who said science advances one funeral at a time. Implying that there are biases in sciences. But I think that's also the way with ideological movements. As a lot of these young Earth creationists die off, may God rest their souls, younger people are going to come along and go, there's no reason to really hold this anymore. Our intellectual leaders are gone, yada, yada, yada. You get it, so hopefully that does happen.
So I was going to ask, I think you partially answered this, but like more sort of broadly, looking to the future, like how do you think that we'll get away, like culturally, from young Earth creationism? How do you think what are the mechanisms by which you think we'll get to the point where we can be like, okay, no one's really a young Earth creationist anymore?
I think a couple things. For one, science needs to keep advancing, and the more it's like every time a new study comes out, it's like another pin in the young Earth creationist movement, and it's slowly killing it, one pin at a time. I think the other thing though is Christians like myself need to actually work within the Christian community to show people it's going to be okay. Because attacking it from the outside, I see a lot of atheists in the past, not you guys, but like other atheists have been like, yeah, we need to get rid of young Earth creationism. And the way we do it is destroy Christianity. And all you end up doing is you creating like a countercultural movement against that. Like, how dare you attack our religion? Now we're coming for you and we're going to really fight to hold it. But you have people working from the inside. Genetically Modified Skeptic was actually just talking about this on his channel. A view of people working from the inside, it actually is going to help the best to diffuse everything. So one of the things I tell atheists is like, here's what you guys can do is like, just encourage people to say they're compatible, like show ways they can become compatible. I guarantee that'll be a more successful in terms of getting people out of young Earth creationism if they feel like they can hold on to Christian beliefs. And so that's what I would say for a lot of people is like, try to show that. Cause I think we'd be far more successful if we took that approach and just tried to show, hey, these are compatible. You could talk about the beautiful aspects of God's creation, how he created. You could talk about, as you and I have talked about in the past, Jackson, the difference of the spectrum between functionalism and structuralism in terms of evolution. You could
Throwback
have
Thursday.
someone, well, yeah, but you could have someone like Cy Gart who pushes a more structuralist view and like, listen, look at how this is actually compatible with the designer in a philosophical sense. And so I think that's what I said. I think I've had a lot more success in getting people out of young Earth creationism than someone who would be like trying to say, yeah, I'm going to attack Christianity to get rid of young Earth creationism.
Right. Yeah. Dapper and I do the same thing basically when we do debates with creationists. Is we basically start by saying we're not saying anything about religion. Like for the purposes of this debate, we're all theists here, and then go from there.
Yeah,
sorry, Dapper, I cut you off.
That is the one small thing, which is that I don't reveal my religious affiliation, atheist or otherwise, online as Dapper Dinosaur. So I just want to make it clear that I do not run an atheist channel. I run a religiously neutral platform that welcomes people of any religious persuasion or lack thereof, as long as you're not promoting pseudoscience nonsense like that. And also, more recently, I've had to be clear, and also aren't a fascist. Because that's been starting to come up more. Yeah, I also don't allow the fascists on.
Well, I think we can all agree fascism is evil.
I would
pretty bad.
6 years ago, I would have agreed that everyone seems to be able to agree about that. I'm less confident about that now that we've had Nazi salutes on, national TV during presidential inaugurations. And since, that same guy's AI bot is now calling itself Mecha Hitler.
That was a
Yeah.
wild past couple days. Oh,
Yeah, it's been a wild few months actually. But yeah. Anyway, I just want to make it clear, like, I do not claim to be an atheist. Whether or not I am one is something that people get to guess, and it's actually fun because I get to see what people like, what things people can like latch onto about what I say based on whether or not they think that I'm. And I've gotten lots of answers. I've had people say that it's usually either some kind of Christian or atheist, but I've had people like try to guess which version of Christian I am, which I know has happened with you.
yeah.
And yeah, so it's always interesting. It's like, wait,
Yeah, I've seen your posts on Twitter.
or I thought you were, an evangelical or Protestant or like a Lutheran. It's like, no. It's like, well, then why do you know this stuff about Christianity? It's like, well, there's reasons. Don't worry about it.
I love just keeping it going at this point. It's just fun for me at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, if I like scroll your comments on Twitter, it is really funny to watch people be like, "Oh, I know exactly what you are." You know?
Okay, so here's a question. I don't know if you're willing to answer this one. Have you changed your affiliation within Christianity since becoming a Christian? Okay.
Yeah, I have been vocal that all I've said is I attend a high church, so it would be high church Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, Coptic. I used to be evangelical, and I had some issues with that. I think theologically, nothing that was like, oh, this is so evil. It's just like I think this is probably more right over here, so I just moved in that direction.
Assyrian Church of the East, calling
it. Yeah, that would be something.
It would be a hard thing to be in the United States. You would have to look really hard to find a Syrian Church of the East parish here in the USA.
Yeah, I think there's a Coptic church here in Tucson. I know that, so we have that at least.
Wait, you live in Tucson?
Yeah.
Holy moly!
Don't think I knew that.
Interesting.
I live in Tucson.
Oh, where?
Oh, I live up in northern Tucson. I don't want to get too specific because I've had death threats, so you know.
Oh, so do you live north of the Catalinas or south?
That's a little bit too specific, but I don't live too far from there. I'll say that.
Okay. Well, we should hang out sometime.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I live closer to the city.
Okay. Yeah. There have been people who I'm pretty sure if they found out where I lived would pay me a visit, and it wouldn't be a fun time.
Oh well, they wouldn't be a fun time for them if they visited me. We're all trained.
That's
armed and trained.
Although you would think that me being a 2-meter tall carnivorous dinosaur would give them pause, but I don't know.
Yeah.
They think themselves a stegosaurus, so.
I mean, that would be pretty intimidating. Those guys were no joke.
Oh, yeah,
sure. There was one other going back. I don't. How long do you have actually? Also,
probably about another half hour or so at the latest.
Okay.
If we have any questions from the audience, we can do that for sure.
Oh yeah, we do have one. I did want to circle back a little bit. There was one thing I wanted to ask you about. If you're familiar with, are you familiar with a guy named Immanuel Velikovsky?
Oh no.
Okay, it rang a bell, but I cannot place it. I'm sure I've heard it before, maybe, but no, I can't.
Have you heard of Zechariah Sitchin? Because they're connected.
Yes, I have heard of Zechariah.
So Velikovsky is like granddaddy of like all the ancient aliens, Atlantis, all that sort of stuff.
That's probably where I've heard it around.
So, Graham Hancock, all those guys, they're all like intellectual descendants of Velikovsky. He did a book called Worlds in Collision in the 1950s, and this is something I actually learned very recently. I did Dapper and I, we did a show with an archaeologist named Joseph Wilson, and we were talking a little bit about creationism, and he mentioned there's a book called the Pseudoscience Wars, I think, that also discusses that the back and forth communication between Wickcom and Morris, and how Wickcom was very invested in Velikovsky's ideas. So stuff like, Velikovsky would argue that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was a real thing, was an actual event that occurred, and it occurred because Earth passed through an asteroid belt, and so those destroyed the city. Or the manna that fell from the sky onto the Israelites traveling in the desert, that was actually like meteors that went into the atmosphere and were converted into edible carbohydrates, right?
That's not how it works.
Yeah,
That's
but
not
he
how
didn't know
anything
that.
works.
Were you there, as Ken Ham would say?
And so,
Fair enough.
Velikovsky, um, what did I say? Did I say hydrocarbons? I meant carbohydrates. Oh, if I said hydrocarbons. But yeah, so he believes that, like, okay, so everything that the Bible references, like, he's like, oh yeah, that happened, and not just by like other cultures too. If there was some kind of celestial event or whatever, he's like, yeah, that happened through these crazy physics that were occurring before all the planets settled into their current orbits. And so Wickcom was actually a big fan of Velikovsky, and he put a lot of Velikovsky stuff into like early drafts of some of his sections of the Genesis flood. And Morris was like, man, that's got to go. That was one of the things. Like, it was like he over relied on Price, and also over relied on Velikovsky. And you actually see some of that dribble into Kent Hovind stuff. Although Kent Hovind has probably never heard of Velikovsky before.
Oh yeah, he is mentioned in here. I forgot about that entirely. That's probably why it rang a bell, because the
Yeah.
Ronald Numbers does mention Velikovsky. So
My
yeah,
big
it is in here. Yeah.
weird Hovind astronomy thing is that he thinks that what started the flood was, or it's not clear if he thinks it's what started the flood or if it's what caused the ice age or if it's both or something.
Right.
He imagines a quote super cool or super cold comet that hits Earth but first it breaks up and then it hits Earth at the north and south poles, which he then imagines would lower the temperature of the Earth because Kent Hovind doesn't understand thermodynamics
Nope.
at the level of a high schooler, because that's not how heat works. In fact, that would just add energy to the Earth system, which would increase the temperature actually. Because that's
Yeah.
Here's what Henry Morris wrote to John Wickham Jr. on Velikovsky, right? He says Price and Velikovsky are both considered by scientists generally as crackpots, although no one has ever takes the trouble to answer their arguments, save by ridicule and summary dismissal. So Morris admitted most scientists consider them crackpots
Mm-hmm.
in their private correspondence, it looks like. But yeah.
I wonder why.
I just want to point out we have a super chat from Mark Rothenbuehler for $5. People talk about ancient aliens on Earth, but no one talks about young Earth aliens conspiracy.
Well, that's
like
coming.
that.
That's the next one. That'll
That
be the
is-
next one. Dude,
That's our
if
prediction.
If you get into the young Earthers, they'll say the aliens are demons, or like they're
Yeah, I
like
was just about to ask
Yeah.
spirits of
if
Nephilim.
you've
or
heard
something.
about like demonic UFOs and nonsense like that. Like,
Stuff like that. Yeah.
like I'm not someone who thinks that UFO is either a single phenomenon, nor do I think that it's aliens at any point. But like, why can't you just let it be something that, like, okay, things are in the sky and we don't always know what they are? That's been true for a very long time now, for basically as long as humans have been around, no matter how long you think they've been around. Some people have looked in the sky and seen something and been like, don't know what that is. That doesn't make it demons or aliens or secret government aircraft or anything else in particular.
It's the Epstein files, is what it really is.
Oof. And we just got demonetized.
You mean the ones that Pam Bondi had on her desk?
Yeah. They were taken up by the. That's what they did. They were going through the sky. You just missed them.
Okay.
So does that make wait? So Epstein was one of the aliens, and they like passed over, like suctioned it up, and then off they went, or
I ruined the whole chat. I'm sorry. I opened a whole can of worms.
No more monetization.
Speaking of that, that's true. I mean, that's usual for us. Speaking of, we had a question from, I believe it was Vishanti, who said, "I'd like the panel's thoughts on the GOP anti-intellectual movement in the USA, particularly in local school curricula and dismantling the Department of Education." What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I always have a problem with that. Again, I think it comes out of the tribal aspect. If we see the Democrats promoting evolution in schools, that must be bad. So we in the GOP are going to do the opposite. And,
Right.
Democrats do that too to the GOP. It's just everything gets so stupid and tribal. No one thinks logically. And again, you have, from this young earth creationist movement that starts in the 60s and builds up in the GOP, really pushing this idea. To be credit, I mean, in this book, Price didn't want evolution, didn't want creationism taught in schools. He didn't want it taught in schools. He was even like, no, I don't think we should teach any of this in schools. But he also would then say, but evolution shouldn't be taught either. Wink, wink.
Which is
so you
also
get that
a
kind of
Hovindism.
idea.
Yeah, that's another big Hovind one.
And that's also why Price was reached out to by William Jennings Bryan for in preparation for the Scopes trial, and Price told him like, "Don't do it. Don't bring this stuff up. It's not going to help you," which I thought was quite interesting.
I mean, they had a falling out too because Price didn't like each other.
In legal terms, I mean, the whole evolution question wasn't even an issue at the trial, so like all of that stuff was kind of useless in terms of the legal questions. But I mean, clearly the trial wasn't really about whether or not some gym teacher that substituted as a biology teacher one day had taught evolution. It was a test case for the law as well as a test for like the American public. So which actually it's the centennial of that case right now, isn't it?
Sure is. Yep, 1925.
Yeah, but I mean, like, specifically, not just the year. I believe that currently, this day, 100 years ago, the trial was ongoing.
That may be the case. I don't remember the exact timeline of that.
Yeah. But I mean, like, with the...
He would know.
But getting back to the main question, though, with the GOP thing, I would say, like, I mean, the best way to push that is we need more people that are going to be in that group saying, stop this. And right now, organizations like Turning Point USA are not helping. I should know. I tried to talk to him about it. Like, they need to stop pushing this anti-evolution stuff. And so, I mean, it's an uphill battle because a lot of them still have a lot of the money and the power. That's what you see in places like the Creation Museum being able to build a museum and an ark. It's like, where are they getting that money from? And so, I mean, like, you need people on the inside pushing it. And I know a lot of the like people in your audience are not going to be GOP type followers, and most atheists aren't. But I mean, like, I think if like, let's like, like what I will do with Jesus mysticism, like when I've debated people on that, I say, listen, I know I'm not going to convince you today that Christianity is true, but here I'm going to argue just from what atheist historians have said to see how, look, people on your own side are saying it's okay. Maybe, and I'm not sure if this is accurate, but maybe if atheists did something similar, listen, I'm just going to try to show you how they're compatible. Maybe that would help in some ways, because I'm trying to think the ways that, most of your audience members could help with that.
I agree. I think that's, telling people that, like, listen, it's not about you're like, because they always go to like origins or bust, right? On like evolution debates. They're like, well, you can't explain where life came from. It's like, well, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, let's just say God, snapped his fingers and life came into existence. Okay, let's move on. And then, let's talk about what evolution actually says. And I think you're right. I think, and that's why Dapper and I do that, is I think that's a good way, instead of telling people just like, well, you can't believe in God and anything. Also, My Unfinished Journey for $5. Hail Jax, Daps, and IP. Does IP know if the countable noun usage of the word evidence, i.e. evidences, by fundy apologists traces back to Price?
Can you give me an example of how they would use that?
So like creationists love to say like there's lots of evidences for young earth creationism.
Oh, yeah. That sounds like Price. I can't think of anything specifically, but yeah, he would do that kind of thing. He'd present different aspects as sort of like evidence for his flood geology, as trying to use it. I mean, so yeah, that's I don't know if that's like a direct thing from Price. I think that's just a general creationist thing. I mean, the arguments they're going to trace back to Price are like the one I mentioned. Like,
the impression it was broader within Christian apologetics than just creationism. Although it's been a while since I've really been reading a lot of Christian apologetics material, because I mostly don't care. But yeah, my impression was generally that it was not uncommon within a lot of areas of Christian apologetics. I feel like I've heard James White use it, and I know he is a creationist, but he doesn't talk a lot about creationism. He's mostly talking about things like textual stuff and Greek grammar and stuff like that. But I'm pretty sure I've heard him say evidences. And I'm trying to think. I think Craig use it. William Lane Craig, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like everyone sort of uses it in their own ways. It seems like just a general thing. Like I've seen, like I feel like I've seen that a lot, depending on what I'm reading. Uh, so yeah, I don't know if that would be specific to young Earth creation. I think it's just a general thing.
It's from what I've been able to tell, it's a thing that happens in Christian apologetics. And the thing is, it actually wasn't that long ago that evidence was a countdown, like just as the normal course of things, that people just said evidences as a normal thing.
Hmm.
And it seems to me, from what I've been able to puzzle together from reading different sources, is it seems like that usage just persisted in certain circles within Christian apologetics, where it died off in most of the rest of the use of the English language, like everywhere else. Which is a thing that happens. I mean, that's just a normal part of language change, right? Certain subpopulations retain older usages as other populations, or even just the broad general public, stop using it. So, like, I'm enough of a descriptivist when it comes to linguistics that I don't complain when creationists or other people say evidences, but I see why it gets on people's nerves.
Yeah,
It's just I guess it's just a word I hadn't seen in other contexts. It just like it did. Yeah, I really don't read Christian apologetics. It's really just like when I read creationist stuff, for me that seemed to be when it was there most. We did have a question about Gish. Do you want to say a few words about Gish?
Gish,
Dwayne Gish.
Dwayne Gish.
He
The
wrote Scientific Creationism with Henry Morris.
So he was the one for which the term gish galloping originated.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, he was he was ICR, right? Wasn't he?
I don't
So
remember if he was particularly affiliated with any of the major
Morris
organizations.
was, though.
Morris was, but
he was the
I don't
founder of
think Gish.
No, I think he was associated with ICR, if I remember. I think
Still-
he was one of the guys that said in this book, he's like, "We've never lost a debate."
Yeah, he
really,
did
just
That does
playing
sound like him. Yeah, that sounds like Gish. Yeah.
yeah. Gish was the guy that he would do the Gish Gallop and then
Mm.
claim they won every debate they've ever had because
Right.
no one could deal with all their arguments. Well, duh, you're Gish Galloping, so of course that's what's going to happen. Like you don't have time in a debate to get to all of the things you just spewed out there.
Right. For anyone who's not aware, who blissfully has not heard the term a gish gallop, it refers to like throwing out like lots of arguments in rapid succession so that your opponent cannot respond to all of them.
Yeah.
Hovind famously does this. He'll read like 30 things in his 10 minutes that he has to opening or whatever, and your rebuttal is like 5 minutes, and you're like, well, I can respond to one of those things, and it will take the whole 5 minutes.
Basically, his
Yeah.
entire debate tactic, and this is not just him; it's a lot of not just creationists, but a lot of pseudoscience pushers.
Yeah.
Their entire
I
debate
forgot.
tactic relies on what's called, or sometimes called, the bullshit asymmetry principle, which is the idea that it takes several times longer to expose bullshit than it does to spout bullshit.
Yeah. I forgot about him entirely because I've just been so focused on Price.
Man,
and
you
Hovind
managed to
in
forget
particular.
about Gish and Raw Matt. If only I were so lucky.
Yeah, I did not even remember Raw Matt until you said him, and then I forgot about him again, and then you mentioned him again, so now he's back in my brain. So
I'm
thanks for
sorry.
that.
I'm
You're just
ruining your
like trying to
entire
stuff
night.
him back in the memory box. He keeps getting out. Okay, I was incorrect. To quote PZ Myers, Gish was vice president of ICR. So
I knew he was
my bad.
associated some way with it.
My
Yeah,
bad, guys.
that's pretty associated, I would say.
That is a little associated. Yeah.
And
We
have a
also
super
have
chat.
$10 from Planet Peterson.
Okay.
Not the same thing, but Oklahoma is trying to make teachers from out of state have to pass PragerU courses to get credentialed. Yeah. And the Trump Bibles. Also, always appreciate IP for standing up to creationism. Do you want to talk
Thank you.
about PragerU and the Trump Bibles? Do you know
Man,
about that?
I know about
Does-
PragerU.
Does it
Oh
creep
boy.
you out as much as it does me to bind the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in a single volume with the Protestant 66 book canon?
Yes,
They all went together.
listen. I'm a firm believer in the separation of church and state. Yes, I do not think we should be putting American documents in our Bibles. Come on, this is kind of weird. I think the Constitution is great. I think the Declaration of Independence is beautiful and great, but let's come on, they're not scripture, guys. I really want to at some point debate a Christian nationalist, because I've got some interesting data I found in sociology that I'd like to share.
Oh, those
So
are some
hopefully-
interesting papers. Yeah, I do appreciate that. Those were very neat. The ones that you sent me a couple on Twitter,
Oh, okay.
and those were and I'll let you explain those.
Oh, and Planet Peterson is adding in that he doesn't know if the PragerU stuff is official yet or if it's just proposed. I haven't heard anything about it becoming official, so I think it's proposed. But like, if it were to go through, it would just be asking teachers to verify that they know the wrong information about history, because I mean, a lot of
and science,
and science.
Because remember, Stephen Meyer works for PragerU also. He has done a number of videos for them, which
like a lot of their videos are just easily demonstrably wrong, right? Like, not wrong in the sense of like, well, I don't know what political ideology I should really believe, because there isn't. I don't think there's a right answer as to what the correct political ideology is.
Sure.
I think that you can come up with like what the results will be of policy implementation.
Sure.
But like, just like when it comes to things like, what is the right thing to do with what we know about atomic science? There's no one answer to that, right? Like, is atomic bombs the right answer? Well, maybe, I don't know. But with other things like, hey, what was the opinion of this particular former slave on the institution of slavery and the Confederate government? And then PragerU will just lie.
Oh God, they're doing time on the cross stuff? Are you serious?
Wait, Robert Fogel?
They're doing like time on the cross arguments? Or, like, that's...
You mean Robert Fogel's book?
Yeah, that was like his line of argument, wasn't it? It was like the slave...
So he changed his view. People don't realize this. So,
it did? Oh, good.
So, yeah, I got a couple of his books. So
wait till you find out what it changed to, because it could be worse. You never know.
No, I've read it. So I've read this book here. He did push back on his older view in this book without consent or contract. Like, he basically said, it maybe was not the whole economic thing, because someone wrote another book. I have it here about a numbers game or something. I've read that as well.
For anyone who's not aware, like his argument initially, glad he changed his views later. The time on the cross was like he took arguments that, or he took interviews with slaves, and when they were talking to a white interviewer, they would, have this very rosy, view of what had happened under slavery. And then as soon as when they were not talking to a white interviewer, then they were like, okay, no, it was horrible. Our families got separated and sold off. We were beaten regularly, etc. It just like
he pushed back on that in the later books, and then he also wrote another book called The Fourth Great Awakening, where he talked a little bit about it, but it was mostly in this one here. But he because the whole first half of the book is him going over the economics and going, okay, we're wrong there.
And then you had Doug Wilson and Doug Wilson and J. Stephen Wilkins, who is a preacher, by the way, who co-founded the League of the South, which is a white nationalist organization, and they wrote Southern Slavery as It Was, which was like a defense of time on the cross, as well as adding more horrible stuff. I've been reading way too much neo-Confederate stuff recently.
Hey guys, stop defending slavery. It's not hard to do. You just
but at any rate, the point is, so they're basically, PragerU, if I'm understanding you correctly, Dapper, has reprised like the time on the cross argument. Is that correct?
So, like, not being familiar with that text, I can't say for certain the degree to which that's true. However, I do know that they have represented various, especially former slave people who were prominent in the abolitionist movement, including Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, as having much softer stances than they actually had in terms of slavery. Because, I'm sure the woman who escaped slavery and then spent most of the rest of her adult life risking life and limb to lead other people out of slavery. Yeah, she was like, well, it's not that bad, right? Okay, sure.
I can't. That's so... Oh my God, that's like, okay, I'm used to them being, and I'm sorry, again, tangent, but like, I'm used to them doing like, because when I first saw their stuff, they're like, free market economics is the right way to go, and climate change isn't real. And I was like, okay, yeah, whatever, that's standard. But then they also added young Earth creationism, and I was like, yeah, I saw this coming, because, Meyer's not a young Earth creationist, but his stuff is very easily adapted into young Earth creationism. and then and so now to hear this, that's like a new low. That's below the basement.
Oh, the thing is, there's no bottom to PragerU.
Oh my
Well, yeah.
god.
The whole thing about Time on the Cross was he tried to argue that like slavery was good for everyone, and so there was no reason to actually end it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm glad he came out later and changed his view.
That's I didn't know that. That's great. I didn't know about that.
Well, that's because this book did not get nearly as much press as Time on the Cross, because it was not as, this was more in line with what other historians are saying. So it's not going to be as like bombastic out of the blue. So this is more in line. There's some things I think he does get wrong in here, from like reading like Ben Wright, for example, as well. But at least, you know, he did come out and say, yeah, my bad.
You know what? Fair. That's you know, that's far more. I'm going to give him far more like room to make mistakes on that sort of stuff than the like defending slavery stuff. So yeah. Oh, and by the way, for anyone wondering, so Erica also did a video on how Doug Wilson defended slavery in Southern slavery as it was, and our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, goes to Wilson's church.
Oh god.
Oh, that's
fun fact for everyone. Yeah. So
yeah.
Again, I need to get a Christian nationalist in a debate with me. I've been wanting.
Remember that time that the Attorney General fantasized about 65 million people getting eaten by alligators at Alligator Alcatraz? And it was like,
I do remember that,
because that's a lot more than the number of people who are in the country without a visa. It turns out, no, that was just the approximate number of Hispanic people in the United States. So she just wants every single Hispanic person to get her eaten by an alligator.
Yeah, that was like a week ago, wasn't it? Also,
yeah, I think it might have been less than a week ago.
It was less than a week ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Turns out, even if you're of the opinion that we should ship everyone who's in the United States illegally to be eaten by alligators, that's not even close to 65 million people. And when you say the actual number of Hispanic people, it makes it pretty obvious that what you actually want is you just want people of a different race from you to all get eaten by giant Mesozoic reptiles. Which, as a giant Mesozoic reptile myself, I object to.
You're vegetarian, I guess.
No. I just don't tend to eat humans. I
That's
make occasional exceptions, but yeah.
Not enough meat on them. Too fatty.
Yeah, they're a lot of them are way too fatty, especially in the United States.
Oh, well, I mean, it's Oklahoma at the end of the day. You have to remember, I think in the last two elections, they're like the only state in the country. I think that's correct. That just every county was red. Typically, if you go to like Nebraska, like some of the inner city counties are blue.
Right.
But like, Oklahoma was just red.
Hey, if you're someone who's currently living in Oklahoma and you're thinking about raising kids there, don't. Just don't. Go to literally any other state.
Yeah.
It's as I said, it's people go to the right and they go too far in certain directions and there's nothing balanced out. I think that's a problem. There needs to be more. I hate the fact that compromise has become a dirty word in politics.
Pluralism, multiculturalism, those have been dirty words since I was young, because I remember listening to a lot of conservatives being like, oh, if you want people of like other, ideas or cultures to come to this country, well, they want to assimilate. Yeah, it turns out that's not only not true, that is like definitely not true for like the children of immigrants here in the U.S.
Oh yeah, in Tucson, there's a ministry that I know of, and I've helped them with certain things, just like making bags for like their summer camp, like like goodie bags. A lot of assimilation. They're actually helping facilitate that. A lot of people of Middle Eastern descent coming over here and helping them assimilate. So yeah, there's a lot of good. We passed a car one time. We were at a park here, and it was a Middle Eastern family, and they were just blaring techno music, and I'm like, yeah, they're assimilating, like obviously.
Yeah, I actually just read a really good book, or a couple of really good books by Aviva Chomsky on, because you can't really see them. I've got a bunch of like Noam Chomsky books up here, and then some Aviva Chomsky books, who is his daughter over there. And she writes some really great stuff about immigration, and so she talks about because that's another talking point. It's like, they don't want to learn English. Again, just simply not true. The English classes are like maxed out on people. There are like wait lists for these classes for people to get in and stuff. Yeah, It's just not true. They're just being
Yeah.
used to, as a scapegoat for terrible policies. That's all that's happening there.
Oh, but by
Yeah.
the way, Mike, you mentioned people from the Middle East coming in, and one thing that for some reason people are still continually surprised by is whenever I mention that when I was in a choir, about half of our songs were in Arabic because it was in fact a primarily Arab choir.
Wow, that's cool. That'd
Yeah.
be beautiful to hear.
It was very nice. I sang the tenor parts, which were always the most boring parts. It was like, okay, you're going to hold this note, and then about halfway through this hymn, you're going to spend 2 measures on a higher note, and then you go back to the old note. I'm like, okay, I can do that, thanks.
Nice. Yeah.
But I
Okay,
was
so
one of the few people who actually bothered to try to pronounce the Arabic correctly, who was not a first generation person from like Lebanon or Syria or something. Because I aced Arabic in college.
so you said you had about 30 minutes ago that you had about half an hour left. So just want to ask any like final thoughts on either the history of young Earth creationism or where we are like today, where you think the movement's going to go, or just thoughts in general.
Yeah, I think people need to realize that the movement is not what people think it is. It's not like the only historic view. Again, you go back to church fathers, there were plenty that were taking Genesis allegorically in the church. And as the science advanced, a lot of Christian thinkers were very much like, yeah, it's perfectly fine. This is old Earth, whatever the science shows. People like B.B. Warfield, who was a fundamentalist and called himself a pure Darwinist. And so people need to realize the actual history is a lot more complex than what we think. Yeah. And I hope the movement dies. I see a lot of people trying to be trad and based right now. And they think that means they also got to be young Earth creationists. And hopefully that doesn't continue. But I think, again, the science continues. It's just going to go by the wayside over time. We just have to wait and keep fighting against it. And it will go. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, if you want to know more, again, I'm not an expert, but I mean on the history, but Ronald Numbers is. Check out his book, The Creationists.
100%.
Check out a Michael Roberts chapter in Myth and Geology as well. It's also very interesting. I love a lot of his work. He's a really good. He's underappreciated writer. I think he should get a lot more attention than he actually gets for sure.
I think a few people in the audience are thinking that we should have had a little bit more contention. So at some point, what we have to do is we have to have you back, and we'll discuss Mosaic authorship of the Torah. And then,
I don't think I've ever. That'd be weird because I don't think I ever claimed Moses like authored that. I don't think I could. I think the best I could say is like I think there was a real Moses figure that may be behind some of it, but as to what parts, it's hard to.
All right, in that case, we'll have to change it to historicity of Moses, or maybe the conquest of Canaan.
Fair, I can do that.
Then we can have the fireworks.
Then we can have the fireworks.
The only thing that I know about, the Canaanites are what I've read in 1177 BC by Eric Klein, which I really enjoyed. Thought it was a fun book. Have you read that one? It's about the Bronze Age collapse.
Wait, 1177?
Yeah, 1177 BC. The year civilization collapsed. Yeah. Actually, the sequel. I have the sequel on my shelf over here. Also, that came out. And so
is it called 1176?
It should be. It's titled After 1177 BC.
Well, that's 1176. So yeah,
I mean, you're right. It basically is 1176. Yeah, I need to read it, but I have so very many books on my shelf. I just started. I'm so sorry. I know. This just came out, and I had to get it. I just started this.
Yeah, it's a great
quite
book.
good. Anyway, okay. All right, Dapper, is there anything you want to add before we sign off?
Look, hey, come check out my second channel, Top Hats Off. We're not doing our normal Star Trek Adventures Let's Play, but instead I am going to be doing an art stream. I have some art assets that I need to have generated, and so I'm just going to go through my process live on stream. We're going to go through terrain generation. We're going to go through instancing, using curve objects to create more complex shapes procedurally. It's a whole bunch of stuff. So if you are interested in any kind of like using 3D art to create, scenes, in this case, it's going to be sort of an outdoor large scale scene. Come check that out. On Tuesday, We'll be doing Kent with Bent again. I'm going to shove myself back into my human suit and then put a tutu on it. So if you want to see my human suit wearing a tutu, come hang out on Tuesday on my main channel, and that's basically it. And there was a super sticker from some weirdo named Inspiring Philosophy.
You did not have to do that. Thank you. You did not have to do that.
Well, you can't stop it now. Now what?
That's true. I really appreciate it.
Is that a samurai Shiba Inu with a trophy? Shiba Inu with a trophy? Yeah, it
definitely
is.
looks like it. Yeah,
that's neat.
Well, thank you both again for coming on the channel and talking about this today. This is Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones and Dapper Dinosaur. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And we have Peter in the background as always. Thank you for hosting. And we will see everybody next time. So bye, everybody.
Bye.